Step back. Number 4, step forward and set a line.
We hear you looking for Candyman, bitch.
Step back. Number 5, step forward and set a line.
We hear you looking for Candyman, bitch.
My name is Tanana Reeve Dew. I'm an author and a screenwriter. I teach at UCLA both Afrofuturism and a Black horror course called The Sunken Place, and co-teach an online version of our class at www.sunkenplaceclass.com.
My name is Stephen Barnes. I'm a novelist and television writer. And I've worked in horror and science fiction and, suspense, but I think that the thing that's most fun in terms of this is I'm a fan of the genre. I love horror. I love film that embraces images of stuff that looks kind of like me. So needless to say, I hope that my perspectives will be shared by some of you guys out there who love genre and just maybe had some of the same reactions that I had.
Candyman, huh?
Yes, have you heard of him?
Mm-hmm. You doing a study on him?
Yes, I am. What have you heard?
Everybody's scared of him once it get dark. He live over at Cabrini. My friend told me about him.
When Candyman came out in 1992, as a huge horror fan, of course, I'm just excited that there's a horror film with Black people in it where they don't all die or they don't die first, So I wasn't looking at it super critically when it came out. I was scared by it. We still joke around to this day. We won't say Candyman 5 times in a mirror because it's
Why take a chance?
Why,
you never know.
Why take a chance? Definitely one of the top 10, probably for me, in terms of horror films, developmentally, as both a horror fan and a horror writer. I noticed some bees crept into one of my books, and I was like, I wonder where those bees came from. So Candyman had an influence on me, I would say. But at the same time, there's this sort of prickly conversation about what happens when white filmmakers, and in this case, it was based on a short story by Clive Barker that was not all about race. So in transferring it to a U.S. setting, of course, that third rail of race seems like a really natural place to open
race
that
is to
conversation.
America as class is to England in many ways.
Right.
And I watched it slightly schizophrenically. In other words, I could just enjoy it as a movie. At the same time, I was understanding that it was a movie using black faces that was designed for white people. It was designed to tap into their fears of the other. Although I think that they actually went pretty decently in terms of trying to humanize the situation, but they couldn't avoid certain tropes. Now, I remember, wondering, well, why did we have to be the villain? Why do we have to be the monster? Well, the fact is that there is actually one sense in which that is social progress. Assuming that there are other representations at the same time at your local movie theater.
Right.
And in 1992, you had Sidney Poitier in his last really good movie, Sneakers, and you had Wesley Snipes in White Men Can't Jump, and you had Wesley Snipes again in Passenger 57. So you have a variety of roles of intelligence and agency and responsibility and even sexuality and so forth and so on. So if you have a full representation, now, okay, we can be the monster because we can also be the hero. If you can't be the hero, then it's not fair to ask you to be the monster
Right.
or play the fool.
But honey, that's a great point you bring up, because the 90s really were this renaissance of Black film. I mean, to this day, or at least right up till Black Panther and Get Out, we were still reminiscing to a degree about, you could have love stories, you could have action adventure, you could have mysteries,
Right.
Films that we haven't seen replicated almost since, in some ways.
Yes.
But in a lot of ways, Candyman almost feels more like a vestige of the 80s, like the late 80s. There was that sort of dearth and urban jungle, lots of preoccupation with crime.
Well,
1992 is a precursor to the 1994 crime bill that President Clinton passed. And this was a time where there was a lot of concern, even in Black communities, to be fair, about crime.
Sure.
So the presentation of Cabrini Green almost being as much of a monster as Candyman himself falls into that sort of political narrative of that era, where black children are super predators. You know, Helen walks into the bathroom and gets assaulted.
Right.
You know, all that stuff is sort of rolled up in there too.
And there, some of the subtextual stuff is the fact that there are only two basic answers about some of the statistical differentiations, you know, in black culture. You can very clearly, you can look at incarceration and life expansion and inherited wealth and infant mortality and all sorts of interesting stuff. And most people fall into one of these two camps. One, it is something intrinsic to the nature of these people.
Yeah.
The other is it is something about their history together
Right.
in the United States. Now, needless to say, I go with the other with the idea that it relates to the history. But whether you look at it, whichever way you look at it, if you say, well, no, it is their essence, no, it is the way that they have existed, there is fear there. Because if it's their essence, then these people are monsters, and we've brought among us people who cannot cope, cannot adapt, cannot fit into our society. Oh my God, all is lost.
Yeah.
Okay, if it's the existence and it's, oh my God, we have damaged these people so horribly. You know, look at the way that we force them to live. Look at the dysfunction that's going on here. We're going to burn in hell for what we did. Now, either one of those things can provide the kind of emotional impetus to create a real horror movie.
Yes.
The different people in the audience coming from those different positions will experience it differently. They will process those images differently. But Candyman might have been one of the very first movies that really integrated, that really was addressing and played directly to that fear of the other, specifically racially, specifically black men who are in pursuit of white women.
Well, the first contemporary one, because when you go back in history, the actual first one would have been, I think, Birth of a Nation.
No. I'm talking about the first one that can work for both sides of the
both sides.
equation.
You're right. Okay,
Because
so you're
Birth
saying
of a Nation
doesn't address-
is
yeah.
pure, this is nature. They
Right.
are animals.
Got it.
Helen.
Yes?
Helen.
Who is that? Who is that?
Helen, I came for you.
By the time you get to something like Candyman, you are almost directly touching issues like miscegenation, violence, poverty. You know, you're doing that and you're taking all of that into, you know, be my victim. Why does he want her to be his victim? Because of what was done to him or because of what he is essentially? No matter which way you look at this, the movie works.
Yeah, the thing with humanizing Candyman as the villain himself works in a pretty straightforward way. I respect the way the director, Bernard Rose, sort of kept away from the violence and like even opening it with the violence of his torture and his hand getting cut off.
Right.
And it's told as a story mostly, and then these
Right.
little flashes. And we talked to Tony Todd, and he's that character is considered a huge anti-hero. And when you're not used to having any kind of hero, you'll take the anti-hero, right? So he's powerful, he's strong. Now the fact that his politics are a little strange, and he's killing black people and white people, and even people like poor Bernadette, who didn't even say Candyman 5 times. Why did she get killed?
Aw.
She was just sort of like,
Casey Lemons, right?
Yeah, Casey
Yes.
Lemons plays that part. But what I think the movie almost has to do, if you're going to play on those ages-old fears of the other, especially the monstrous black man in pursuit of the white woman, you have to do a little bit more to try to contextualize the second monster in the movie, which is Cabrini Green.
Hey, come up in here.
Excuse me, y'all can come up
Who
in
you
here.
looking for?
He's going up to see a friend of ours.
Sure you not the police? Huh?
Look like 5-0 to me. Ask Blondie where she going.
Who she going to see? Who you going to see?
Come on.
Where you all going now?
Hands up, people! 5-0, coming out the back door! Police!
It's okay. They think we're cops. They're not gonna follow us.
because a symbol of the hell that we create on Earth when we do not love each other, when we not consider each other fully human. For the one side, the other side is like, look at the way those animals live.
Right, and that's the
They
thing.
like living this way.
So as a viewer, I'm watching Candyman, and I'm sort of extrapolating out that all of those slum dwellers in Cabrini Green have their own bad histories and historical violence against them, and redlining, and you know, discrimination that crowds them on this. Because I know the context.
Yes, exactly.
But if you don't know the context, this is it. Just looks like those people live like animals, right? They address this in the way police respond. You know, someone says, "Oh, the police are going to come because she's white," you know, and they address the fact that there's uneven police response to calls.
I heard her screaming. I heard her right through the walls. I dialed 911. Nobody came. Nobody came. Everybody's scared. He could come right through these walls, you know. I'm scared. Scared for my child. That he never gonna catch him. Who? Candyman.
These are communities that are both over-policed, where activities that might not be considered criminal where we live, you know, are over-enforced because, oh, there's a black guy, let me pat him down, you know, stop and frisk kind of thing, and also under-policed. So when there's a crime in your hood, you know, 911 is a joke, said Public Enemy, right?
A movie like Candyman made today, you would have to have more time with the black characters. You have to humanize them more.
I think the friend Bernadette,
yes,
Casey Lemons, would not have died.
She probably would not have died if you did it today. And you could remove race from the equation somewhat, and you could remove gender from the equation somewhat, and be left with just a movie. You could do that by having Helen be black, for instance, and for instance having a friend of hers who is black in a good relationship with a black man.
It would have to really be a black movie.
That's right. That's exactly right. It wouldn't be. It was not a black movie. It was a movie about black people for white people.
Right.
Okay. So it would have to be, how would a black audience respond to this, or how would we balance it so that both a black audience and a white audience would respond to it, even though they might respond somewhat differently.
I mean, the one thing that I think is really true to form is that Bernadette acted the way I would have acted throughout most of this movie. I wouldn't have said Candyman 5 times. I'm not going to play with that. And why are we going here?
Yes.
Why are we doing this investigation?
So black audiences are watching. Yeah, that's right, girl. You know, it's like, don't go in there. But then she gets killed.
Yeah, she gets
killed.
killed.
And so what you get is the very typical, all the black people who you could conceivably identify with are going to be killed in this movie.
Right.
And which is a very specific trope of its own. The person who almost universally survives a horror movie is a young white female of childbearing age. Okay?
Helen. Although
Helen dies. But there are other white people in the movie.
Yeah,
you know?
that's true.
So you have that thing that if that's the most precious thing, and the second most precious thing is young white males, so you get a breeding pair. Okay. Then you look at, well, who gets killed the most often? It's going to be the geek. It's going to be the person who's behaved immorally. It's going to be the drug person, or it's going to be the black person.
I'm not wild about the fact that he's killing black folks, though,
right.
Or even why he is. So it's that lack of politics that the demon has.
You could easily take that movie and say, okay, so recut this movie, rewrite it slightly. We're going to do this. How would I go back and do this movie with the minimum number of changes? But actually keep the same emotional load. One of the things is I would make sure that it worked for black audiences as well as white audiences, which would take some tweaking. But that question about killing, not just killing white people. See, that's the reality. You're talking about black on black violence. You're talking about what creates...
Which is a word for violence.
Which is a word for violence.
Most crimes are committed within the same racial group. I
hate
that term, actually.
But you do have a problem if you have people who are badly abused, neglected. People will start to cut themselves. They will start to exhibit self-destructive behaviors. All you're seeing is the social, the macro version of individuals who've been abused and hurt, practicing things that hurt themselves.
Warehoused together.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. So it's not just that you commit more crimes, but literally you have internalized negativity, you've internalized hatred, pain, fear. You can't go outside the community to vent that. So you vent that violence on the person right next to you. This happens all the time in poor areas, white, black, or anything else. You beat your wife. You beat your kids.
Children,
because they're what's there for you to be able to express this horrible fear you have that your life is slipping away, your sense of possibilities and potentials, that any optimism you have with a kid is just being drained out of you day at a time. And that fear manifests as violence. So you could do something with that. All it would take is really a roundtable conversation. What are we trying to say here? What is the fear that we want people to feel? How do we want people to feel when they walk out of the theater? I think that it is almost certain those conversations did not take place. However, the filmmakers were good enough. They had enough basic sense of the humanity of the characters that the movie works anyway. And it worked. It can support a conversation like the one we're having right now.
It could have been much more egregious.
Yes, it could have been bad.
I knew you'd come.
Burn him.
So, of course, in this era when now there's a lot of push to diversifying the cast, you can't forget that you can't just diversify the cast.
Look, it's not just that you can't. It's that it is pointless to do that if you don't have diversity behind the camera.
Right.
For a variety of different reasons, the diversity needs to be among the decision makers.
Right.
Because otherwise, what they will do is that the minority characters will be sock puppets for the attitudes of the decision makers.
Sure.
So if you want to know how to restructure Candyman, if you were interested in doing that, you have that round table, and there's a black man and a black woman sitting at that table.
And I don't know what kinds of discussions took place during the original production. I read somewhere that one of the producers knew they were sort of playing with the third rail, using the black man and the white woman.
Yeah.
Obviously. So, and I do see efforts to be sensitive about that in the film.
I agree.
But I have a feeling that were it done today, or hope that it were it done today, that inclusion at the table, like you said, the decision makers would include, what people call in literature sensitivity readers. One of the biggest saving graces in Candyman is Tony Todd as Candyman. I mean, we can't forget that. I mean, why didn't I feel more irritation about the black man lusting after the white woman? And because I think Tony Todd as the actor brings such gravitas to that role.
He humanizes that role.
It elevates the film.
Well, he is obviously, that could have been Othello. It was not written at the level of Shakespeare, but I think he played it at that level. And there was not a moment when he was the monster. At every moment in that movie, as far as he was concerned, he was the hero.
He grabs the screen, his stride, that deep baritone voice, his pain, all of that not only contributes toward making him this really compelling anti-hero, but someone who will haunt your dreams. And not because he's black, so much, for me anyway, maybe I was more open to him because I'm black, but because he is both monstrous and tragic, and as the actor Tony Todd really combined those elements so well.
I can see that broken heart. I can see that feeling of nothing in the world it can compensate for the pain that I have suffered. I will burn the world in my pain. I could see that. I could feel that. And I think it takes a truly fine actor to create that effect.
Yes.
He elevated the material. I actually think all the actors brought it to the best of their ability.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think
the cast was
Tony
very
Todd
good.
transcended himself.
Surrender to me now, and he shall be unharmed. We have a bargain.
But I'm afraid.
Do you fear the pain, or what is beyond?
Both.
The pain, I can assure you, will be exquisite. As for our deaths, there is nothing to fear.
So I think in a lot of ways the lasting legacy of Candyman is this, of course, canon character in horror who I think horror goers will be talking about probably still 50 years from now, which is great. That's great. That's a great win for a horror film, but also a bit of a cautionary tale that when you are caught up in political winds, especially since the filmmakers weren't American and the writer wasn't American, when your movie sort of depends on political winds, you have to take extra care to make sure, as you said, that the film is for everyone, that the film is equally powerful for black and white. It's not overusing fear of black masculinity for white audiences, and that if you are going to have those other black characters in the film, you have to treat them very conscientiously. But overall, Candyman is still one of the great American horror films.
Well, I think that the fact that the filmmakers were not American, as you say, means that they were outside some of the issues that have poisoned America. They're able to look at it from the outside. So I think that they automatically, I would have been far more nervous had they been Americans.
That's probably true. It could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, absolutely. What you had there was a movie in many ways that was ahead of its time. Are there issues? Absolutely. But did they get a lot right? Yes, they did.
Right.